Hello and welcome to the 741 channel. Thank you for stopping by. Today we're going to take a look at the radiator gooseneck on this 2007 Pontiac Vibe. So you may be able to see here that this fitting that connects the gooseneck of the radiator to the overflow tube is broken. Now the reason this is broken is that when I was changing the water pump in this car a couple of years ago, I accidentally leaned on this when the radiator cap was off and I snapped it. And at the time, what I did to fix it was put some JB weld around here, and that kind of sealed it up, and it has been holding it until about now. So what's happened is the JB weld has kind of dried out. It's cracking. You may be able to see there I'm kind of able to peel a little bit of it away. So what we need to do is kind of replace this and seal everything back up so that it doesn't leak. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is get the radiator cap out of the way. So now, as you may be able to tell, this thing is just kind of pulled off and broken. So we'll pull it out of the hose and we'll get all this old JB weld kind of peeled off of here. The product that I'm going to use this time is JB Weld Plastic Weld. You can see this is a quick setting epoxy. It should set up within about 5 minutes and should be good for about 4,400 psi. You can see that it comes in an easy application tube. We can just push down on this and it'll squirt out the correct ratio of hardener and epoxy that we need. So I'll open it up by twisting this and pulling it straight off. And then I'm going to use this old bottle cap as my mixing surface. Okay, so you can see I've got some equal amounts squirted out there. I'm going to put this back on to seal it up and set it aside. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this cut piece of zip tie to mix everything together. Okay, now that I've got it mixed together, I'm going to apply some of it to the end of the nozzle piece here that's broken off. Now what I want to be careful of is that I don't clog this nozzle end, otherwise we won't get any coolant flowing through it. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the radiator end. Okay, now that I've got both surfaces coated, I'm going to reconnect them and get them lined up as best as I can. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold this in place for a period of time while the epoxy sets up. And while I do that, I'm going to use some of this extra epoxy that I mixed up to kind of coat around the outside and get the joint kind of sealed up. But what I want to make sure I do is I leave enough room for the hose to go back on the end here. So I got to be careful of that. Okay, because this is an odd shaped thing, there's no real easy way to clamp it. So I'm just going to stand here for a few minutes and hold it together while the epoxy starts to set. Okay, so as it turns out, the JB Weld Plastic Weld didn't really work too good with this. I stood there and held it for about 10 or maybe even 15 minutes, but it still didn't set up good enough to kind of hold this in place. So what I'm going to try instead is this quick steel reinforced epoxy putty. You can see it's made for plastic repair, so let's see what happens. This should be pretty much the same thing as traditional JB Weld and ought to do kind of what the original repair did. Hopefully it'll last at least as long as the other one. So you can see I'll open up the tube. Okay, so I'll cut a little bit of it off here. And you can see the way that this works, it's just like JB Weld. It's sort of a two-part epoxy, but there's one substance in the middle and one substance on the outer side. And we'll just kind of knead this together to form it into the correct epoxy. So as you can see, I've got this kind of kneaded up and mixed together. And I've got the nozzle over here ready to go. So let's form this around the nozzle and get everything sealed up. So as this stuff starts to activate, it'll start to kind of get slightly warm. That's how you know it's kind of mixed correctly. So we got to be mindful of a couple of things here. The first thing that I want to do is make sure that I don't get any putty or so much putty here that I block sort of the radiator cap so that that'll activate. But I also want to leave room here for the hose to be able to slip back on the end of the nozzle here. Okay, so I've got this shaped and formed about as best as I'm going to get it. And I've got the epoxy kind of kneaded and mixed about as best as I'm going to get it. So we'll just try and hold this steady for a few minutes while this cures and sets up. So it's been about 5 minutes or so, and this seems to have set up a little bit, at least enough for me to be able to pull my hand away. So what I'll do now is let this set overnight, and then in the morning we'll fire the car up and see if it's leaking. So I've let this sit overnight, so it should be good and sealed. Now, I thought about it after I went inside last night, and I maybe should have approached this a little bit differently, because this will probably last for a year or two like the original repair did, and we'll be right back where we started from. So I think in the future, if I have to do this again, what I'm going to try and do is put a smaller tube inside the two pieces and connect them that way with that original epoxy that I tried to use, and then put this around the outside, and that may help hold things together better over time. But either way, we're going to run this for a little while, and hopefully it should hold. So I'm going to fire up the engine, let the car warm up. Maybe I'll even take it for a ride around the block to get everything heated up, get the pressure going, and make sure that there's no more leaking. So I just got back from a 5 or 6 mile ride. The engine's up to temperature, everything's up to pressure, and I don't see any evidence of any leaking. So for now, I think the problem is solved. But I think what's going to happen is over time, this is going to deteriorate like my first patch did, and we'll be doing this job again in a year or two. But anyway, for now, I think it's patched, and we'll just keep an eye on it, and we should be good to go. That's pretty much going to wrap up fixing the radiator gooseneck on this 2007 Pontiac Vibe. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to leave a comment or subscribe, feel free to do that as well. And if you'd like to support my channel in another way, please consider visiting my Amazon store, which you'll find a link to in the description below. Thanks for watching!